Good evening. My name is Brett Scharfs, and I'm the director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this 23rd annual International Law and Religion Symposium at BYU Law School.
Check and see if the translation's working.
Religious Rights in a Pluralistic World. Can I get a thumbs up if you're getting the translation into your various languages? If you have a headset and you're hearing this in your language, could you give me a thumbs up? Are you hearing this in Chinese? Are you hearing this in Spanish? Okay. Welcome. We're very grateful to have you here. We have 95 delegates from 45 countries, translation into 14 languages. So this, I think, is one of the larger endeavors that we've attempted here at BYU Law School. We'd like to begin this evening with a prayer that will be offered by Archbishop Javier del Rio from Peru.
I will do it in Spanish. Te bendecimos, Señor, y Dios nuestro, por tu amor y tu misericordia para con nosotros. Te damos gracias.
Father in heaven, we give thee thanks for all that thou hast created, for all that exists, and for thy love that we have been called to this existence to live eternally with thee. We give thee thanks for having brought us to this symposium that we are beginning, for giving us these days to be among us, to be able to have a dialogue and get to know each other mutually, to do thy will. We ask, Father, that thy great Spirit will be on us and each participant in the symposium and all those who will be with us in internet and other media. May thy Spirit will be in our hearts with blessings from thee, and that will give us the love between us. We ask of thee, who lives and reigns eternally and with mercy with the centuries and centuries.
Thank you very much. I'd like to first introduce the Dean of the J. Reuben Clark Law School, Dean D. Gordon Smith. He has been Dean of the Law School since May of this year and has been a professor here at the Law School for about the last 10 years. Before that, he was at the University of Wisconsin and several law schools before that. He is one of the nation's leading scholars in law and entrepreneurship and is a graduate of the University of Chicago Law School. Dean Smith.
Thank you, Professor Scharfs. Welcome to BYU Law School. I am thrilled to look out and see you, and I'm thrilled to have you in our beautiful law school. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this opening session of the 23rd Annual Symposium of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies. The center is an amazing part of the law school, and we're grateful for all of the work of those who have put this symposium on. We're honored to have you here at our campus, and I hope you'll feel welcome during your time here. I'm particularly pleased today to welcome the president of Brigham Young University and the former dean of the law school, Kevin Worthen, as well as tonight's distinguished keynote speaker, Heiner Bielefeldt, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on religion, freedom of religion or belief, and a professor of human rights and human rights policy at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg in Germany. Welcome. I want to thank my colleagues, Professor Brett Scharfs and Professor Cole Durham, and those who work with them in the International Center for all of the work that's required to put this symposium on, and for the wonderful generosity of the donors who have made this symposium possible. Let me also express my gratitude to the hosts. I hope you will encounter them many times during the next couple of days, and that they will make you feel welcome here, and you'll sense of their generosity and love for you. Finally, let me say that although I have to excuse myself tonight to meet a family obligation. I'm grateful to have some time over the next couple of days to spend with you. I hope during that time that we can spend a bit of time talking about your stories, and I can tell you a little bit about how wonderful our law school is. I hope you'll have the chance to meet our faculty and students while you're here and come to love our law school as we love it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dean Smith. We're very honored to have our university president, Kevin Worthen, here with us this evening. As Dean Smith noted, President Worthen was dean of the law school before taking on a responsibility as a vice president of the university and now president of Brigham Young University. I'll let him tell you a little bit about Brigham Young University, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. When he was a young professor here, he is a graduate of BYU Law School, and so his mentors and professors all knew him as a student. Not only did he graduate at the top of his class, but he then went on to clerk for Supreme Court Justice Byron White. There are only 13 of our graduates from BYU Law School who have had the opportunity to work as law clerks on the Supreme Court, which, by the way, puts us in the top 20 of all law schools in the country. But in addition to having that experience, he comes from a very small mining town in Utah called Price. And our former dean, who served for about 15 years as dean of the law school, who was really President Worthen's great mentor in many ways, Reese Hansen, used to introduce President Worthen in the same way I will introduce him to you now, as the pride of Price. President Worthen.
Thank you, Brett, for that introduction, and people in Price will appreciate it as well. So, it is an honor and pleasure to welcome you here to the 23rd Annual International Law and Religion Symposium at Brigham Young University. I was around when the first one took place. There were not nearly as many delegates, and we were rushing to photocopy. I say we, they were rushing to photocopy things to get them out. It really has been wonderful to see it grow, and we're honored by your presence here. The specific topic that's been chosen this time, religious rights in a pluralistic world, is an important and very timely topic. As you will all understand, religious belief is an important part of the lives of most of the inhabitants of this planet. And for most of them, it's a very defining part of their life. That sometimes gives rise to cooperative efforts. It sometimes gives rise to conflict. And determining how those dynamics play out is one of the things that you'll be doing in these next few days, and we're grateful for that, because figuring out that balance is one of the important things for global security, prosperity, and peace. Now, it's fitting that such a conference dealing with religious liberty in an international setting takes place at Brigham Young University. We are the largest religiously affiliated university in the United States, with approximately 33,000 students. You'll get a chance to meet some of them during this time. They are very bright, they are very talented, they are very friendly. All of them have committed to live their lives in accordance with standards based on the principles and values of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is very much a faith-based community that you are holding this symposium in. Just as one example, several of you will notice, if you really look astutely at some of the classrooms you'll be having meetings in, you will notice that there are pianos in those classrooms. There's one right out here in the hall right now. That is not because we begin our law classes with a musical number or we sing during law classes. That is because on Sundays, this building generally serves as the place where congregants of students meet to worship. So this truly is a religiously based university in which religion is very important. That's one reason why it's fitting that you meet here. But it's also the fact that this is an international conference that is well suited to this university as well. We have students attending the university from over 100 countries. 65% of them speak a second language. Now, if you're from another country, that won't be very impressive, but in the United States, that's a high number. 16% of those students speak a third language as well. We offer courses in languages regularly in over 55 languages each year, and another 30 languages we offer courses on depending upon demand and need. It really is a remarkable place in which there is a lot going on. We have typically in a semester about 31% of our student body who are enrolled in foreign language classes. To give you some comparative idea, in the United States, the average is about 9%, so we're about more than three times those who are enrolled in class. We have study abroad programs, over 140 of them in 55 different countries, which makes it one of the largest study abroad programs in the United States as well. And so there is an international flavor here to this campus, and we hope you get a chance to see that as well. We have a sign that says on the entrance of one of the entrances of campus, "The world is our campus." And we believe that to be true, and we want our students to be engaged in what is happening in the world. But let me just thank you again for bringing the world to our campus, because you represent the best minds engaged in this topic, and it truly is an honor and a privilege for us to host you here, and I look forward to the proceedings. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, as director of the center, it's my pleasure now to give you a brief introduction to who we are and why we have invited you here to this symposium. This is a photograph taken last year at this symposium with some of our delegates walking back to the law school. You can see the beautiful Wasatch Mountains behind and the large Y, which stands for the Young in Brigham Young University. Our nickname is sometimes, we're referred to as the Y, where our sister institution up the street, the University of Utah, is referred to as the U. So you won't be here very long before you get a sense of the difference between the U and the Y. The International Center for Law and Religion Studies is genuinely international in its scope. Over the first 16 years of the center's existence, we have sponsored or participated in more than 300 conferences and more than 50 law reform efforts in more than 130 countries. Each year, the center helps sponsor 10 to 15 conferences and participates in approximately 30 additional conferences, training programs, consultations, and workshops. Here you can see the map being filled in with the countries where in the first 15 years of the center's existence, we have helped organize conferences and symposia. This, of course, is our signature event, the annual International Law and Religion Symposium. Through this year, we've had more than 1,200 delegates from more than 124 countries participate in the symposium. We're a center. This is important because it makes it possible for us to do more as a group than any of us could do individually. You've had a chance to meet many of our center personnel as well, already, but it's genuinely a collaborative and a group effort which makes it possible to do the work in which we engage. As a center, we invite many visitors to the law school. This year, for example, we've invited delegations from Afghanistan and Pakistan, from France, as well as Saudi Arabia. We also host visiting scholars. We're very proud of our 4 Vietnamese visiting scholars who are here under the support of a Templeton grant this semester. They're participating in our Introduction to American Law class, as well as our 2 seminars on law and religion, one focusing on law and religion in the US, and one focusing on international and comparative law and religion. We also have 2 visiting senior scholars, Alan Brownstein, who's just retired from the University of California, Davis, one of the United States' leading law and religion scholars, and Professor Akin Obe, who is the former dean of the University of Lagos in Nigeria, and who is also here for a year as a visiting scholar and is together with Professor Brownstein, participating in the teaching of these law and religion seminars. So we have 4 of us, Professor Durham, myself, Professor Brownstein, and Professor Obe, participating in this educational opportunity for our students. As a center, we host and maintain 3 websites. One is called ReligLaw, which is a repository of data, laws, cases from many countries of the world, hopefully someday most countries of the world, that will be a research resource. We also host the Strasbourg Consortium website, which we think is the world's leading compendium of the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights relating to freedom of religion and belief. We also have a website devoted to the center and the center's activities. In addition to that, we have a daily, near daily, headline news service where we send out an email to thousands of subscribers with headlines divided between international, Europe, and United States. No one can possibly click and read all of these headlines. This is part of yesterday's international headlines section. But by scrolling through it and clicking on those that are of particular interest, it's a really convenient way to stay up to date and abreast of what the cutting edge issues are. As attendees at the symposium, we're going to enroll you automatically in that email system. It's very easy to opt out. So all you have to do is click at the bottom of the page if you'd rather not be a part of that. But our senior editor, Don Luthayer, is the mastermind behind this project, and it is really one of our signature services. Our focus is law and religion. Our work lies at the intersection of law, where practical, workable, and enforceable solutions are sought to pressing social issues, and religion, which is one of the places where the deepest questions of life, meaning, brotherhood, and truth are examined and lived. We believe this is one of our sources of strength, because religion can be contentious, but by focusing through the prism of law, we're able to lower the temperature and the volume of many of these discussions and focus on solutions to shared problems, often from an international and comparative perspective. As part of our work as law and religion scholars, we've been involved in law reform and constitutional efforts in more than 50 countries over the 15 years of the center's existence. You'll see the range of activities in which we're engaged. Here are some photos of some of our activities in China, Myanmar, Vietnam, Budapest, Indonesia, just over the past 12 months. Studies. We're an academic institution, and our approach is primarily academic, although occasionally we engage in advocacy on behalf of religious freedom as well, usually before the US Supreme Court, occasionally before international courts as well. We also involve our students in our work. Everything we do, we try to remember that we are first and foremost an educational institution, and that the work that we are trying to do will be carried into the future by our students. We love them, we appreciate them, we admire them, and we consider it one of our most precious stewardships to help prepare them for meaningful work in their lives as well. You'll get to know many of them as they participate in this symposium. Please know that they participate as volunteers and that they're here because of their interest in you and their interest in religion and the rule of law. The founder of this, or the namesake of this law school, was a church leader and a former statesman and ambassador to Mexico named J. Reuben Clark. He served in the first presidency of the church, which Henry B. Eyring, who you heard, and President Monson, who you heard speak this morning, are currently members of the first presidency. And J. Reuben Clark gave a speech that is one of the classics of Latter-day Saint preaching. And it was called "To Him of the Last Wagon." And it paid tribute to those pioneers who were at the back of the wagon train, where it was dusty and dirty and smelly. And they perhaps did not have oxen as strong or wagons in as well a state of repair as some of those in the front. And they may not have been the leaders. They may have been the faithful followers. And he, in his ministry, often emphasized being of service to them of the last wagon. And we are very proud of the fact that we bear the name of J. Reuben Clark at our law school. And we remind ourselves often of his legacy of service, and in particular, his legacy of mindfulness of those of the last wagon. We're at a law school, this law school, Brigham Young University Law School. And this is important because the law, as I said, gives us a prism through which we can find practical solutions to many of the issues that affect us. And because we are a small center, but we're part of a well-established law school, that gives us a strength and a capacity that we would otherwise not have. We're also part of Brigham Young University, and this is very important to us as well. As President Worthen noted, this is the largest religiously affiliated university in the country, with more than 2,000 international students, students who speak foreign languages, with international programs. Our students are known for their maturity and their cultural experience. And we believe that we are located in one of the most beautiful settings for any university in the country. When President Worthen gave his inaugural address as president, he talked about going to the mountains and scaling mountains and the opportunities and challenges that are presented by the mountains symbolically and physically which surround us here at Brigham Young University. Finally, our university is owned and operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so, as President Worthen noted, we are a religiously affiliated university, and part of a university for whom religious freedom is a very important principle. In fact, religious freedom is one of the 13 articles of faith of the church. Many years ago, Joseph Smith, the founding prophet and president of the church, was asked by a journalist to describe the basic teachings and principles of the church. And he jotted down off the top of his head 13 identifying principles, which became known as the Articles of Faith. And the 11th Article of Faith says this: "We claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may." And so a commitment to religious freedom is not only a foundational principle and a deep doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it is quite literally one of our articles of faith. And in conclusion, I want to share a quote from Joseph Smith. He said, "The saints can testify whether I am willing to lay down my life for my brethren. If it has been demonstrated that I have been willing to die for a Mormon, I am bold to declare before heaven that I am just as ready to die in defending the rights of a Presbyterian, a Baptist, or a good man of any other denomination, for the same principle which would trample upon the rights of the Latter-day Saints would trample upon the rights of the Roman Catholics or of any other denomination who may be unpopular and too weak to defend themselves. It is a love of liberty which inspires my soul, civil and religious liberty to the whole of the human race." And so as we gather in the spirit of this idea that religious freedom is something that we should not advocate for ourselves, but for each other. Welcome to BYU, and welcome to the 23rd Symposium. Now I would like to introduce our founding director, Cole Durham. He has been director of the center since it began on January 1st, 2000. That makes it easy for us to remember how to answer the question, how long have you been in operation? Professor Durham is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and one of the largest souled people you will ever meet. Professor Durham.
So it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Let me just say I first met Professor Bielefeldt. Well, let me come back. So he's really a longtime friend and this year's recipient of the 2016 Distinguished Service Award presented by the International Center for Law and Religion Studies. Professor Bielefeldt was appointed to serve as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief in 2010, and his mandate was renewed by the UN Human Rights Council for an additional 3 years in 2013. His term of office has been further extended through the end of this month to enable his successor to complete service as Special Rapporteur for Iran. Professor Bielefeldt's position is one of what are now over 50 thematic and country-specific special procedure mandates, including special rapporteurs, independent experts, and special representatives of the Secretary General and certain working groups that each address special areas of concern for the United Nations. In addition to serving as special rapporteur for over 6 years, Professor Bielefeldt has had a full-time position as Professor of Human Rights and Human Rights Politics at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg in Germany, and I think that he should teach the administrators something about human rights because they give him much too heavy of a teaching load. He took his first degree in Catholic theology at the University of Tübingen, followed by a doctorate in philosophy, also from Tübingen, and did his Habilitation, second doctorate, at the University of Bremen. He has taught at universities in Mannheim, Heidelberg, Toronto, Bremen, Bielefeld, and also Oslo, Norway, and has also participated widely in conferences around the world. Reaching beyond Christian theology and Western philosophy, he has done significant work on Islam. I first met Professor Bielefeldt near the end of his 6-year service as director of the German Institute for Human Rights in Berlin, a position which he held from 2003 to 2009. I was introduced to him by a long-term friend and delegate in this conference, Tura Lindholm. I'm glad to see you on the front row. What I can attest is that Professor Bielefeldt has brought extraordinary energy, intellectual depth, profound human concern, and extraordinarily valuable and balanced judgment at a time when world events have called for such judgment in the field of freedom of religion or belief as never before. Despite carrying what sounds to me like an extraordinarily heavy teaching load at his university, and despite insufficient staffing or support for his position at the United Nations, he has kept up a schedule of responding to hundreds of individual letters from individuals around the world, regular site visits to countries, and the preparation of 2 major reports each year. His recognition of key issues in his reports and his focused studies of key issues such as the right to conversion, recognition and registration of religious entities, violence in the name of religion, religion and gender issues, accommodating religion in the workplace, and many other such issues has contributed in major ways to improving the implementation of the ideal of freedom of religion or belief worldwide. It's a great honor for me personally and for our center and for the institutions in which our center is housed to present Professor Heiner Bielefeldt with this year's Distinguished Service Award.
Thank you.
We'll take some pictures afterwards. That's a little stand, but I'll get out of your way. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Let me start with expressing my very profoundly felt gratitude to all those who have brought us together here, organizers of the conference, and many people who made that possible. And then, of course, Cole, I have to say, you have been such a blessing. Now, I'm trespassing. Human rights is secular language, but I'm saying it. Yeah, I'm trespassing. This is not UN terminology any longer. A blessing to the issue of freedom of religion and belief. And I personally have felt it over all these years. And I mean, I think there are many in the room who know you well and who appreciate your commitment, but a commitment always in that spirit of modesty, never imposing, always trying to be serviceable. And I mean, this has been a tremendous, a wonderful experience, and I'm sure that our friendship will continue. Thank you very much. Yeah. Working for freedom of religion or belief is actually very easy. Because, I mean, this is the most fascinating task the UN can give. The pay is perfect. It's tantamount to what a Mormon missionary gets. I'm not giving any details. But it's perfect. Because, I mean, it adds also to the degree of independence. As special rapporteurs, they're in and out. Sometimes I use almost biblical language. I'm saying I'm in the UN, not of the UN. No? Okay, yeah. So yeah, an independent person, and I mean this is sometimes a crazy position. But freedom of religion or belief is actually the most fascinating task. Why? I think you know it all. But this right brings together the human rights approach and religion. The human rights approach that really focuses on human beings, and then religion. So some people say, oh, this is not easy. Some people would go a step farther and say, this is a paradox. And some even say it's impossible. Some of you might know there's a book out, I'm not mentioning the author, because I don't want to be too nasty on anyone in particular, but the book is titled The Impossibility of Religious Freedom. Stupid stuff. It's pretty fashionable in academic circles nowadays. I don't know why. Yeah? So, I mean, there's nothing paradoxical about freedom of religion or belief. There's nothing impossible. But one thing I can tell you, it's highly provocative. It's a highly provocative right, for good reasons. And I would say, I mean, these provocations can be pretty healthy. So maybe this is also what I like with freedom of religion and belief. It holds a lot of provocations for governments. I will go into that part in less than a minute. But then also for religious communities. But also for societies broadly, including Western societies, and maybe even for human rights. So a number of provocations. Now let me start with healthy provocations for governments. Okay, I mean, governments, states are the ones signing up international covenants. So they have signed up the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Here you have Article 18, freedom of religion or belief. Then the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, again, Article 18. And I mean, I could, of course, enumerate countless documents that testify to a broad agreement. So at the surface, we have a broad agreement on freedom of religion or belief as a basic human right. But I mean, if you scratch the surface a little bit, what you discover is a rhetoric in many governments, in many states, that can succinctly be summarized, yes, but. Freedom of religion or belief, yes, but. And it can be a big but. So let me give you 3 examples. So some say, yes, freedom of religion, but only for the real religions. And then the state, I mean, defines legitimate religious options. Maybe limiting those to the divinely revealed religions or to classical religions, excluding more recent religious movements, or so, and in some constitutions you find, okay, freedom of religion, but limited to 6 options, 5 options, 3 options, 2 options, 1 option. What is that? It's not a joke, it's very sad. Because, I mean, the government does not have the authority under freedom of religion or belief to define legitimate options, but has to recognize human beings. They are the ones who define what they believe. I mean, the self-understanding of human beings in questions of religion or belief is the starting point. It's not always the end of the story. Things can be more complicated, but it must always be the starting point. So I don't believe if governments tell me we have 16 religions or we have 22, let alone we have only 3. I mean, this cannot be true. I mean, this is really a slap in the face of realism of religious diversity as it exists in virtually all countries. Okay, another yes, but. Freedom of religion, fine, but first you have to seek recognition. What is that? Recognition, administrative recognition, and that can take time. Sometimes it can take ages, an eternity. And once you got it, you have to renew it. It's already expired. Yeah? And I mean, this is actually happening in many countries. Recognition, but I mean, apart from the bureaucratic hassle, I mean, the very term is strange, because read the first words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, the first words of the preamble of the ever first international human rights document, it's recognition. Recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. Wonderful. Recognition is the first word, but recognition not in terms of an administrative procedure, no, recognition as a basic insight. Because otherwise, recognition could not be given to an inherent dignity. I mean, this is the starting point of all recognition procedures. It's the axiomatic precondition. It's the unconditioned precondition of any meaningful human interaction whatsoever. It's the source of law and morality and normativity. Yeah? Recognition of human dignity. So, I mean, it's a starting point. We start with recognition as something given and not that people have to work for, to apply for. I mean, what is that? Certainly not a human rights approach. Another example, yes, freedom of religion and belief, great, but only within the limits of the law. What does that mean, within the limits of the law? Okay, it's true. Limitations are not entirely precluded. Again, I mean, human life, human society can be complicated. And this can be a truism, actually an invitation for governments to impose all sorts of limitations, stipulations, and sometimes they read the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but they seem to ignore one little word that has a lot of weight. One little word. When it comes to limitations, that little word is only. Only. Limitations on freedom of religion and belief only if, there are a number of ifs, only if, which means, I mean, this is not a balancing exercise, a little bit of freedom, a little bit of public order, so the weighing scales, and if we have a serious public order issue, whoop, then freedom goes away. So the weighing, it's a justification logic. I mean, the starting point, you have freedom. And if limitations are deemed necessary, then the burden of justification falls on those who argue for limitations, but they have to really prove it empirically, make it plausible, go through all the criteria. This is not a weighing logic, it's something different. Yeah? Even the limitations should in the end be in the service of an order that gives freedom, that gives breathing space. So, I mean, why are so many governments across the world, in various regions, anxious to limit, restrict, or even twist freedom of religion or belief? Twisting it to such a degree that you may sometimes wonder what is left. Is there anything left? Okay, some governments want to preserve an existing religious hegemony. I mean, this is pretty much the case in the MENA region, we all know it, Middle East, where states stage themselves as custodians of religious truth, of religious purity, waging wars against heretics, against non-believers. Okay, you know it all. But then it also happens in many formerly secular states under the auspices of national identity. So protecting national identity within then religion is a basic ingredient. I mean, you see that happening in Russia, in India, but sometimes also under the auspices of Buddhism. So in many, many countries. Or Hungary. I mean, today we had the referendum on closing the borders for refugees, and there is certainly an element of religious xenophobia in that. Yeah? Yes, and yet there's another pattern in which religion itself does not even play the main role, because freedom of religion or belief is not about religion only, but also about freedom. So it's a right to freedom, and this one right to freedom somehow encapsulates many other rights to freedom. You cannot have freedom of religion without freedom of expression. You cannot have freedom of religion without freedom of assembly. So it's somehow the gateway to freedom. And the more authoritarian a government is, be it a theocratic government with an official state religion or secular, and the more authoritarian the government, the more afraid they are of freedom. Especially one-party systems always have to nourish the illusion that there's a seamless identity between the people and the party. A seamless identity, it's an illusion. But in order to keep that illusion, I mean, then communication must be placed under strict surveillance. And therefore also freedom of religion is dangerous because it brings people together. It brings people together who convene, who start talking, and who knows what happens. So authoritarian regimes really threaten freedom of religion or belief, or the other way around. Freedom of religion or belief in conjunction with other rights to freedom is a provocation. It's a challenge. It's a necessary provocation, thwarting authoritarian control policies. So much about governments. Now let me turn to religious communities. So, you may think religious communities benefit from freedom of religion or belief. I wholeheartedly agree. Yes. But the problem is, all religious communities benefit, yeah, also my rivals, competitors, dissidents, schismatics, all the people that I don't really like so much. Yeah, so, I mean, taking it seriously as a universal right, a right held by all human beings in that broad area of freedom of religion and belief, convictions, yeah, okay, it can trigger uneasiness, also among religious communities. On top of that, the human rights approach may have a disturbing component for religious people, maybe especially if it's not entirely correctly understood. The human rights approach means human beings are the right holders, also in the sphere of religion. Human beings, not only as individuals, also in conjunction with others, in community with others, and of course then also infrastructural, institutional aspects come on top of all of that. So it's human beings broadly speaking, but religion is approached from the lens of human beings who are the right holders. The question now, doesn't this turn the order of things upside down? Doesn't this mean human beings, men rising above God, and religion being turned into an item of personal, spiritual satisfaction? Maybe even an item of personal preference, of personal whims, of personal choices, and the term choice seems to come from the shopping malls, maybe also the shopping malls of spirituality. So isn't this really a perversion of how things should be? No. No. Human rights take religion very seriously. But if you take religion seriously, you will discover religion exists only in the plural, so you have to take religions seriously. Taking religion seriously means taking seriously a plurality of very different religions, maybe even irreconcilably different religions. So what is sacred for one religion, maybe it's totally incomprehensible from the viewpoint of another. So what can the law do with that plurality? I mean, if you want to protect religion by law, directly, you have to single out one religion or a number of religions or a type of religions, because, I mean, of that huge diversity. So I would say the only common denominator, the only plausible common denominator, what all religions have together and belief systems, they are believed by human beings, practiced by human beings, as individuals and in community with others. So this is the common denominator. And that's why legal protection is not given to religions themselves, not to religious identities, religious truth claims, purity claims, but to human beings, empowering human beings to stand up for their belief and also to organize their lives in accordance with their profound convictions. I mean, this is an insight. It's an insight. So protecting religion indirectly, but really human beings are the ones who have to do that work, who have to do the business. Protecting human beings in their dignity, in their freedom, in their equality. And then if you talk about freedom, you cannot avoid maybe the term choice. I agree, it's a misleading term. I mean, many of you today were in the congregation in Salt Lake City. I heard all the sermons. The term choice never came up. But the term calling came up in quite a number of these speeches. So, I mean, now how can you reconcile choice and calling? At the surface, it looks like they're totally different. Choice is, I mean, your personal preference. Calling is, okay, you are being called upon. But there's not the slightest contradiction. That's not the slightest contradiction. You have merely to take into account that the term choice should really be limited to its legal use. It's a legal term. It's a legal term, not a term of religious phenomenology. It does not make much sense. Doesn't really capture the existential experiences of human beings. So it's a legal term. There it has its function, and I would say an indispensable function. Because what choice means, protecting a space in which religious beliefs, religious convictions can unfold, protecting that space against coercive interferences. So giving that space means you give choice, but the experience that people have when it comes to profound convictions it's not really a matter of choice. I mean, you can invoke, in order to say this is not something totally mysterious, let's invoke the analogy of marriage. I mean, choosing a spouse, maybe from a catalog as an item, maybe some people do that, but certainly most of us would not really appreciate that attitude. Yeah? So, rational choice. No. I mean, the existential questions of human life are always questions that move beyond choice. But what the law can provide is actually make sure no robustly arranged marriages, no forced marriages, no forced conversion, no forced prevention of conversion. Yeah, so preventing coercion in those existential dimensions, giving a space. Giving that space. This is the specific role of law. We have to take that into account and maybe sometimes to translate this function into other language, into non-legal languages. And then we will discover, no, this is not the man, the human being rising above God and turning religion into just an instrument of personal satisfaction, well-being. It's not, it's something more seriously. It's about freedom. It's about freedom, and freedom is the precondition of any authentic faith, any authentic religious or non-religious belief. So there's also a provocation for religious communities. Now, societies. And after mentioning authoritarian governments, which may mainly be located outside of the West. Okay, it's debatable. Let me now turn to the West, now also criticizing societies, in particular Western societies. Here again, I mean, freedom of religion or belief holds a provocation. But it's a different provocation. It's not the freedom component, which threatens authoritarian control obsessions. I mean, freedom is taken for granted, rightly or wrongly, in many Western societies. No, it's not the freedom component. Now here it's the religion component. So the question, what has religion to do with a free modern society? Is there any serious role left for religion? In Germany, we had a rather disquieting discussion 4 years ago on ritual male circumcision. Okay, complicated issue, I don't want to go into that issue. During that discussion, I was frequently interviewed, and believe it or not, I'm not telling you a joke. The first question usually was the following: what prevails? What should prevail? Freedom of religion or human rights? Just imagine, freedom of religion or human rights. I mean, that either or. By which then freedom of religion is, by implication, removed from the list of legitimate human rights. I mean, those interviewers may know there is an Article 18. I mean, they are not uneducated, but they question the legitimacy of that. Maybe for historical reasons it happened that freedom of religion made it into a human rights document, but is it legitimate? Is that legitimate? And so there are many people who have questions, who have their doubts. And in a volume that recently appeared, and again, I don't want to name authors or editors, they are not sitting here, not on this bench certainly, a volume titled "The Politics of Religious Freedom." I found the following quote. I mean, this is the only quote I'm giving you. "To be religious is not to be free, but to be faithful." Let me repeat that. To be religious is not to be free, but to be faithful. Okay, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Shockingly shallow. Shockingly shallow. So it creates a dichotomy between having a serious conviction and being a free person. I mean, what would be left of freedom? And I mean, this really betrays a shallow understanding of freedom, a total misunderstanding, in fact, of the multidimensional aspects of human freedom. Because, I mean, human freedom, on the one hand, you have the legal aspects. Law can create space. I mean, as I said that a few minutes ago, can create space. And that is creating freedom. But then human beings also have to fill that space, which is also an act of freedom. You fill it with convictions. And creating the space means you open up choices. But filling the space can mean you move beyond choices. So if you have a serious conviction, you will not say, oh, this is my choice. So for instance, a Jehovah's Witness refusing the military service will maybe invoke a phrase that Brett cited earlier. I think you cited it from Joseph Smith. Following the dictates of my conscience. I mean, this is a word, I mean, you can traceable it to the European Middle Ages. Yeah? So following the dictates of your conscience. And this is the most intensive experience of human freedom. If it's really the dictates of your conscience, not any coercive authorities mixed with that, mingled with that. So the same Jehovah's Witness can insist when talking to the government, give me my choice. There's no contradiction, not the slightest contradiction between insisting on choice and saying, no, this is not my choice. These are different levels of human freedom experience, And in order to fully understand human rights, sometimes, I mean, we have to complement the legal technical language, which is very important because otherwise we will never get the degree of precision needed for human rights to be applicable. But we have to move beyond. And also remind ourselves, I mean, there is something existential at stake. And the existential dimensions are always the dimensions beyond choice and also beyond what the law can really provide. But the law can provide the preconditions for this to be a matter of respected personal responsibility. So, I think in our Western societies, if I read also academic stuff, I mean, this sort of statement, to be religious is not to be free, but to be faithful. Sometimes I fear we are in danger of losing the sense of why freedom is important, why it has existential significance. Why we cannot, rights to freedom, why we should not reduce this to just a lifestyle matter. I mean, we take it for granted, something nice to have. There is more at stake, and that's why we need people who consider working for freedom as their calling. Okay, now let me conclude. Freedom of religion or belief is a provocative right. And I would say it's provocative in a healthy way, in a necessary way. For governments, freedom of religion or belief serves as a reminder that respect for human rights, including freedom of religion or belief, of course, lies at the heart of democracy, lies at the heart of rule of law. It's a reminder that respect for human rights enhances rather than undermines political legitimacy, although it no doubt challenges party monopolies, political corruption, and authoritarian structures. For religious communities, freedom of religion or belief serves as a reminder that authentic belief is free belief, and that we also need guarantees, legal guarantees for free believing. And freedom of religion or belief is not only important for religious minorities. I mean, this is something we take for granted. For minorities, that can also be sometimes a very important remedy. For minorities, violations of freedom of religion or belief may even become a life and death issue. But freedom of religion or belief, I would say, is equally but differently, but not less, important for religious majorities. Because majorities are sometimes in danger of calling for state authorities to protect their hegemony. And that can then lead to this pernicious equation: my territory, my turf, my identity, my religion. And I mean, the possessive pronoun is what brings it all together: my, our. It leads to a territorialization of religion, by which everything that religion has to offer in terms of attractiveness, persuasiveness, spirituality actually gets lost. It's corrupted. So, freedom of religion and belief is important. It's a challenge. It's a provocation for religious majorities in particular. So they should take it up. They have to get on board. And freedom of religion and belief is a healthy provocation for societies at large, including in the West. And here, it serves as a reminder that freedom is not just a lifestyle matter, something nice to have. That there is something more existential at stake, and that a free society needs that awareness, the awareness that in order to remain sustainable, also in situations of crisis, freedom needs real conviction. So it's not only faith needs freedom, but also freedom needs real convictions. Not faith in the narrow sense, but real convictions. Let me add one little thing. This morning, when sitting in the bus next to Gerald Filson, we had a discussion, and I want to take one point from that discussion, that freedom of religion or belief is also a provocative reminder for the human rights community, reminding us that human rights are not a religion. Human rights are very important. I mean, they are becoming more and more important in our complicated world. I mean, they are the only way of really shaping coexistence in respect for everyone's human dignity. I mean, this is a high task. It's a very high task, but it's not a religion. If we turn freedom of religion or belief, if we turn human rights into another religion, I mean, it could not really develop that function of coordinating pluralism. It would be just another belief system, either next to religions or on top of religions, maybe reducing traditional religions then to sub-confessions of an overarching worldwide civil religion. I mean, this is never going to work. It would be a total misunderstanding. It would erode the legitimacy of human rights. So, and also the UN High Commissioner is not the high priest of an international civil religion. I'm sure he would agree. I'm very sure. Yeah, so my concluding sentence, freedom of religion and belief is a surprisingly provocative right. It warrants all our commitment, intellectual, political, and emotional. So let us be provoked. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bielefeldt. It's obviously a wonderful thing to begin a two-day conversation with a provocation. And so that's a wonderful launching pad. We have about 25 minutes before we finish this opening session. And I've asked Professor Durham to moderate a question and answer session. Now, there are students who will have microphones. Are they here? Can they identify themselves? Very soon, we will have students with microphones. And until then, if you could, the reason we need microphones is so that the translation makes it into the adjoining room. So looks like we do have microphones now. Feel free to ask your questions in your language of comfort, but we'll have to take some time to make sure that we get simultaneous translation. Could I also ask our students to bring in some headsets? There may be people who didn't pick up headsets because everyone speaking is speaking in English, but we may need to distribute some headsets to people if we have questions that come in languages other than English. So Professor Durham will recognize you for questions. We'll then make sure we have translation, and then Professor Bielefeldt will be given an opportunity to respond to those questions. Professor Durham?
Yeah, let me just say, if you have a question and you're not speaking English, if you can identify your language, because the interpreters have to quickly switch what's the basic language. So, we've given you quite a bit of time now to think of the first question. So I see one from Neville Rocco on the front row. Yeah. So bring a...
Could you stand when you...
Yeah, it would probably be helpful to stand.
Could you stand and identify yourself with your questions?
Yes, Neville Rocco. Yes, Neville Rocco from Brussels, originally from Australia. And I work in the EU office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. First of all, thank you for a very stirring address. It was provocative. But I have a question of characterization and valuation, if I may. In the West and in its developing jurisprudence, we see a lot of complaints about people being forced to photograph things or to make cakes for events that they find they have some sort of conscientious objection to doing so. But then in the Levant and in other countries, we have people who are Yazidis, who are Christians, who are actually dying for their religion and their beliefs. Do you see any qualitative or any inherent difference between those two claims of freedom of religion and belief?
Yes, I mean, the answer, I think, is already in the question. Do I really have to answer that? Obviously. I mean, we should take all the violations seriously, all the claims of violations. So each case warrants careful listening. But we cannot deny the fact that there are very, very different degrees of intensity of violation. So genocidal dimensions of violation of freedom of religion or belief, and discrimination, or people who feel torn between conflicting demands of law and their personal moral convictions. So, I mean, there are huge differences in intensity, but nonetheless, each claim of a violation deserves to be taken seriously, and we should listen, should always listen. But bearing in mind that the world is complex.
Okay, let's see. Joshua Neo in the back row. Yep.
Thanks. Thanks. Joshua Neo from the Australian National University. So let me try to ask you a provocative question in response to your address. So my question relates to the phrase freedom of religion and belief, especially the relationship between religion and belief, right? So there are two ways we could approach it. One way we could think that belief captures religion and includes religion without remainder, right? Such that we could just absorb religion into belief and religion becomes superfluous because belief is a broader category and we just really have to care about freedom of belief. So there's one option, and the second option we could say, well, religious belief is distinct and different from belief, right? There is something different about religious belief such that we could justify singling out religious belief from just belief. And then the onus seems to lie on those who want to single out religious belief to show what is distinct about religious belief as opposed to belief. So my question is, which way do you see, how would you read religion and belief? What's your approach, and how would you justify that approach?
I mean, the full title of this right is freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. So the right covers a broad spectrum of phenomena which we could possibly summarize as the identity-shaping profound convictions of human beings and conviction-based practices. I mean, this, for instance, the practical component is a major difference between freedom of religion or belief, on the one hand, freedom of expression. So it's not only the verbal expressions, but sometimes also dress code issues, but also for a Jehovah's Witness refusing the military, the decisive point is not to say it, I don't like the military, but actually not taking arms. This is not the answer to your question. So, but I mean, it's a full range, and in the application, one has to be rather open and also pragmatic. So there is no real definition. This is a religion once and for all. This is belief once and for all. So historically, the component of belief was introduced in order to also cover non-religious persuasions of a profound identity-shaping nature. So the beliefs of those who sometimes call themselves the non-believers. So it's a bit confusing. In French, it's religion and conviction, religion et conviction, which is, I think, clearer than belief, also meaning the non-believers. Yeah, so it's really a bit confusing. The Human Rights Committee, so the UN body in charge of monitoring the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, I mean, pointed out in this very important general comment that they published more than 20 years ago. Article 18 covers theistic, non-theistic, atheistic beliefs, as well as the right not to profess any religion or belief. So it's really very, very broad. And of course, I mean, your question was, wouldn't belief cover everything? Maybe. I mean, in a purely academic discussion, I could possibly even agree. But I'm in favor of sticking this because, I mean, the broad range of thought, conscience, religion, or belief is clearer, indicating, I mean, that we really have to address very different demands. And demands often also having an element of a life practice. I mean, the way people as individuals in community with others shape their lives. I'm not sure whether this would really be clear enough if we just reduce everything to belief. I think it would actually, it could endanger the wide scope and of protection under this right.
Yes, go ahead.
Fran Hiesel from Guam. Human rights, religious rights included, invariably involves conflicts. This right against that right. The simple question I have is, I mean, we could use many examples, draw on many examples from our contemporary society here. But the question is, who negotiates a settlement in cases of conflict?
I'm not sure whether I can really answer that question, because, I mean, conflicts, the settlement of conflicts, I mean, that is not something done only by law. I mean, that also requires diplomacy, and there you really have to look into the various conflicts. I mean, whether it's Israel, Palestine, Syria.
No, I don't mean those kind of conflicts.
Sorry?
I mean conflicts, rights conflicts. I mean conflicts, let's take an example.
Yeah.
Let's take the example of the Catholic opposition to abortion. The Catholic opposition sometimes goes further than just simply in opposition to abortion, practicing abortion among its own population, among its own adherents. Sometimes it goes as far as to promote a denial of medical services or aid to other people on the grounds that abortion is part of that. You know, you can see that in, that's a contentious issue today. My question then is, since it involves a religious belief, who negotiates?
Okay. Abortion is a very specific case, because there is no right to abortion, no human right to abortion internationally. We have the right to health. That's internationally recognized in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. And right to health then also includes dimensions of reproductive health. But a right to abortion as a human right so far has never been acknowledged. So that's why, I mean, I will nonetheless answer, even though, I mean, the example you gave has, I mean, leads to more questions even, yeah, so before giving the answer. But, I mean, generally, if we have different rights claims, I mean, also human rights claims, more specifically, colliding, of course, we have institutions dealing with that, legislators and courts. The first question should always be, is the collision real? Because very often that is questionable. So we had numerous court cases and also legislative initiatives assuming that women's rights on the one hand and wearing the headscarf on the other hand under freedom of religion or belief is irreconcilable. Now talk to women, and after a while you will wonder whether this is really a very wise understanding. Yeah. So I mean, the first question is: do we really have a conflict? So we better start with a precise empirical phenomenological analysis, talking to people. Okay. In many cases, of course, you will see yes, there is a conflict, and then the task is to do, and this is a complicated task, to do justice to all the human rights claims at stake in a particular context. So, I mean, there are actually two terms which I personally don't like. The one term, and so sorry if that now sounds like connected to the election campaign, actually it's not at all, Trump rights. Yeah, so an abstract hierarchy. So some people say, okay, gender issues first. So as long as we are in the realm of CEDAW, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination of Women, okay, nothing else can even enter the picture. I mean, this is we have to do. And then in a sort of lexical order, once this is done, maybe we can move to a different stadium. So but also the other way around, freedom of religion or belief trumping everything. No, this is not a card game. It's not a card game by, I mean, the person with a bigger card, with a trump card, then, I mean, throws all the other things into the basket somehow. I mean, this, it requires a recognition. I mean, there can be very complicatedly interwoven rights claims, and all of them deserves to be taken seriously to the maximum possible. Sometimes one has to take a priority decision, but it should never be an abstract priority, never an abstract hierarchy. And that's why, I mean, Trump rights is really a misleading metaphor. And the other metaphor that I personally don't like is, and I said it already, balancing. That's too relativistic. So inviting all sorts of trades-off, some sort of compromise. So we have criteria, even when limiting one right by invoking a competing right, we have to do it as precisely as possible in order to preserve the substance of all those rights who are at stake. I mean, this is a rather abstract answer, but I mean, also your question was very general. Otherwise, we would have to really discuss cases.
Oops, let's see.
Buenas tardes.
You'll be next.
César Vázquez de Guatemala.
Cesar Vasquez from Guatemala.
Nuestro disertante dijo muy claramente
Our speaker said very clearly
que el humanismo
that
no es una religión.
being human isn't a religion. Humanism isn't a religion.
Mencionó que
He mentioned that the first minister of the United Nations isn't a high priest.
por la influencia,
Due to the influence,
podríamos decir que
we could say
como que estaríamos frente
that we are facing a new religion,
partiendo de Naciones Unidas.
starting and coming forth from the United Nations.
Aún cuando se habla de un nuevo
Even when we talk about a new world order, that includes
el ajuste
the adjusting
de los sistemas religiosos no es
many systems of religion
forma de
to a new way to teach and educate from the United Nations.
sobre las
And they would be over all the institutions, our country's institutions. So that's why there is contention at times. Those who are protecting their rights can also be pushing them forth.
So as I heard the translation of the question, very briefly, it's whether the UN is establishing a kind of new world order that that is complicated for people to react to at the local level.
Yes. Okay. And in the beginning, you also, if I understood it correctly, you questioned whether humanism wasn't possibly a religion or a belief system. And my answer would be, it depends. It depends. I think it also depends, there are different linguistic understandings of humanism. So I personally, coming from Germany, I attended a humanistisches Gymnasium, a humanistic school run by the Catholic Church. So a humanist gymnasium run by the Catholic Church. And humanism in the German context invokes memories of Erasmus of Rotterdam, Goethe, Wilhelm of Humboldt, Immanuel Kant. It doesn't have an anti-religious or post-religious ideological flavor. In the UK, when people talk about humanism, they will more likely think of Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, so evolution of biology. So I attended the World Conference on Humanism, actually twice, in Oslo and then in Oxford. And at the end of that conference, the organizers wanted to produce a little video with me. And the last question was, are you a humanist? And I mean, like the usual academic, I started to answer, it depends on how you define. Okay, but then I found it stupid. I said, no. Yeah, because I realized this is really something different. I mean, here, humanism presents itself, to use now the Rawlsian terminology, as a comprehensive doctrine. I mean, John Rawls is a different setting. I don't want to go really into that. It's a comprehensive doctrine. And sometimes humanism can be doctrinal. And okay, people are free, of course, to also have humanist doctrinal beliefs, including beliefs in evolutionary biology. I mean, there's nothing against that. But mixing, let's say, human rights, the framework of human rights, with one particular ideological interpretation, of course, would be a problem. That would be a problem. It would really mean to occupy human rights from the standpoint of one particular worldview. It would be the equivalent of saying human rights are just Christian values. I mean, this is also one of the simplistic equations that we sometimes come across. Yeah? So the same, by the way, with secularism. Secularism can be a space-providing principle, so a constitutional divide by which, I mean, the state opens up the space, but it can also be a principle by which the very same space is shrunk. So ideological. So like George Holyoake, the founder of the British Secular Society in the mid-19th century, his programmatic book was titled Secularism, a Confession of Belief. Yeah? So then it's another belief system. And people should be free to have these beliefs, to live accordingly, to organize. It's all fine. But I mean, using that particular lens to then give a binding interpretation of what human rights law means would really destroy the applicability and persuasiveness of human rights as being open for different appreciations from different worldviews. I mean, so that's why whenever it comes to issues like humanism, secularism, okay, let's listen carefully. What is it really that these people have in mind? And yeah, very often the answers are not black and white. So it requires sensitivity, vigilance, and it's work in progress. New World Order is not a term I would ever use. And I mean, what we currently witness with the UN is certainly not that the UN is a new world order. No. I mean, the problems with the UN are exactly, I mean, of a totally different nation. I mean, we experience painfully how limited the system is.
So yes, the question there, and this I think will probably be the last question. So,
thank you. My name is Sahar Aziz. I'm a professor of law at Texas A&M University School of Law, and my question is related to your work in Europe in particular. But we're in an age of kind of secular liberalism as a hegemonic cultural and political framework. And yet, many of these societies also claim to support and preserve religious freedom. So when you see the situation of Muslims in France, and particularly Muslim women who want to wear a headscarf and also go to school and go to public government agencies, it creates somewhat of a sense of confusion by those of us on this side of the Atlantic. And I wonder, you know, what your analysis is between these tensions of belief versus conduct and public versus private, and how what these de facto lines seem to produce in terms of the lack of, or the inability to practice religious freedom in societies that claim to be the bastions of religious freedom under liberalism.
Okay. So, I mean, this is not a concern only on the other side of the Atlantic, or this side of the Atlantic. It's also a concern on the European side of the Atlantic, and also in France itself. So, for instance, the Commission, the Human Rights Commission in France, they lodged a complaint. And the Conseil d'État, so the Supreme Administrative Court, also declared this, I mean, crazy burkini bans illegal. Now Sarkozy has committed, okay, we will turn that into a law rather than having just a local decree. So, I mean, there's a cultural war going on, which has nothing whatsoever to do with religion. I mean, this is not in the understanding of religion. is a travesty of freedom of religion. Yeah. So I mean, France has a Bill of Rights. I mean, it's still the 1789 Bill of Rights, the French Revolution, and freedom of religion merely figures as a subcategory of freedom of opinion. No one should be harassed because of their opinions, even religious ones, even même les religieuses. Yeah. So it's, I mean, this is pretty weak. It's very weak. And secularity of the state should be in the service of providing space, in the service of freedom of religion or belief, non-discriminatory application. But there, I mean, it seems to be turned into a lifestyle issue enforced by the state or by some state agencies, into even a doctrinal component. And I mean, some scholars working in France actually call for a secularization of secularism, which points to exactly, which is, I think it's not a paradox. It points to the ambiguity of all these terms. Like I said it earlier on humanism. It really means, is it something, is it doctrinal, or is it something open, giving space? And in France, I'm not saying it's always doctrinal, but I mean, there is a lot of ambiguity currently, so one needs more clarity. But this is a demand also coming from within the French society.
Well, thank you very much. I join you in thank.
All right, we're very grateful to Dean Gordon Smith for being here to welcome us this evening, to BYU President Kevin Worthen. Thank you very much, President Worthen. We appreciate it. Professor Durham, thank you for your moving introduction and recognition of our keynote speaker. And especially thanks to Professor Heiner Bielefeldt for launching our symposium in such a meaningful and significant way. We now have a reception down one floor. The ground floor in this building is called the second floor. So if you go down one level, you'll be on the second floor, and that is the ground floor, and that is where the reception will be held, in the Memorial Lounge and also back into the library. So feel free to spread out. There's plenty of space for us. Vans will be available beginning quite soon for those who are tired and are more interested in getting back to the hotel. To the east side of the building where you came in, there will be vans that will be available to shuttle you back to the hotel. But they'll also be available after a full hour, so you can enjoy some dinner, some conversation in the reception. Tomorrow morning, we will begin here in this room with the first plenary session beginning at 8:30 a.m. So if you could plan on beginning your shuttle from the hotel at about 8 a.m., we would appreciate it, because we would like to be able to stay on schedule so that everyone is given their full allotment of time, even through the afternoon sessions. So please join me with a final thank you, and we will see you again tomorrow morning at 8:30.